They think they know the story of the Crusades. They think the worst horrors happened on distant battlefields against foreign enemies. But they're wrong. Because on April 13th, 1204, men wearing crosses turned their blades, their fury, and their so-called holy mission on unarmed Orthodox nuns. And what they did inside those convent walls was far darker than anything history class ever dared to explain. Year 1204, April 13th. Constantinople is burning, but the flames aren't from Muslim siege towers. They're rising from torches carried by men wearing crosses. Inside the convent of Christ Pantops, 43 Orthodox nuns kneel in prayer. Their voices tremble as they whisper Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. Outside, they hear it, boots on stone, drunken laughter, the crack of sacred doors giving way. These women have spent their entire lives devoted to Christ. They took vows of chastity, poverty, silence. They always expected martyrdom might come from pagans or infidels. They never imagined it would come from men who claimed the same faith. Sister Euphemia is 73. She's been a nun for 56 years longer than most of the soldiers outside have been alive. Her hands, twisted with age and decades of labor, cling to a wooden rosary so tightly her knuckles go white. She spent half a lifetime preparing to die at the hands of enemies. She never imagined those enemies would wear the cross of Christ. The sounds close in, more wood cracking. A scream from the convent next door suddenly cuts off. Silence, then their own door bursts inward. The men who stumble in are drunk, laughing. Their surcoats bear a bright red cross. Some even have Deus Vult, God wills it, stitched proudly across their chests. Sister Euphemia rises. Her voice, sharpened by decades of liturgical chant, slices through the chaos. We are brides of Christ. You wear his symbol, act in his name. A fist slams into her face. She falls. Blood spreads beneath her silver hair. What the Crusaders, Catholic warriors of the Fourth Crusade, did in the hours that followed wasn't just conquest. It wasn't just war. The Orthodox Church still calls it the greatest betrayal in Christian history. A wound so deep that even 8 centuries later, it echoes in the divide between East and West. The question isn't whether you can handle what happened next. It's whether you're willing to remember what your history books left out. If you're drawn to real documented accounts, the world-buried stories textbooks softened or erased, then every view, like, and subscription helps us uncover more. We dig through Vatican archives, Byzantine manuscripts, eyewitness records scholars ignored for generations. Now, back to the story. Because what happens next makes Zara look like mercy. To understand how Christian soldiers ended up terrorizing Christian nuns, you have to understand how the Fourth Crusade became the greatest disaster in medieval Christianity. It began in 1198. Pope Innocent Roman III, young, ambitious, burning with zeal, called for a new crusade. This time, it wouldn't be a suicidal march through enemy territory. They would sail to Egypt, cut off Muslim supply lines, then sweep north to reclaim Jerusalem. Smart, strategic, almost brilliant. Tens of thousands answered: French knights, German soldiers, Italian merchants chasing profit wrapped in piety. They gathered in Venice in 1202, ready to sail, except for one catastrophic problem: they couldn't pay for the ships. The Venetian Doge, Enrico Dandolo, 90 years old, reportedly blind, sharper than any blade forged in Damascus, smelled opportunity like a shark smells blood. "You owe us 85 silver marks," he said. "I'll forgive the debt, all of it, if you do Venice one small favor. That favor, attack Zara, a Christian city on the Adriatic that had rebelled against Venetian rule." The Crusader leaders hesitated. The Pope had forbidden attacking Christians. The punishment was excommunication, eternal damnation, but they were broke, stranded, and sitting on 30,000 armed men who needed to go somewhere, so they did it. November 1202, they sacked Zara. Christian soldiers killing Christian civilians. The Pope excommunicated the entire army, and then came the second deal with the devil. A Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, desperate and ambitious, approached them. "Help me retake Constantinople from my uncle," he promised. "I'll pay everything you're owed. I'll reunite the Orthodox Church with Rome. I'll fund your whole crusade." Too good to be true because it was. The Crusaders sailed to Constantinople, the wealthiest Christian city on earth, home to relics, libraries, gold beyond imagination, and countless monasteries and convents filled with people who believed their vows would protect them. June 1203, they arrive. Through threats and negotiation, they put young Alexios on the throne. He delivers nothing, no money, no unity, no support. By January 1204, the Byzantines have had enough. They overthrow him. Some say they strangled him with a bowstring. A new emperor takes the throne and tells the Crusaders, "Leave now or die." The Crusaders are trapped, broke, starving, humiliated, excommunicated, deceived. Encamped outside the richest Christian city in the world, the leaders hold a council. No official record exists, but the outcome is clear. April 9th, 1204, they attack. If this moment doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson history tries to teach over and over. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one who looks different. It's the one who looks the same but believes your suffering is justified. April 12th, 1204, dawn. The Venetian fleet approaches Constantinople's sea walls. Massive ships with siege towers mounted on their decks, something no one has ever seen before. Brilliant, terrifying. The defenders fight with everything they have, but they're exhausted, outnumbered, and led by an emperor who's barely held the throne for 3 months. By midday, the sea walls fall. Emperor Alexios V flees through a hidden gate, taking what remains of the treasury. The city is leaderless, defenseless. Then something inside the Crusader ranks snaps. There's no discipline, no order, no restraint. What follows becomes known as the sack of Constantinople. But those 3 clean words don't touch the horror. Niktos Choniates, a Byzantine historian and senator, watches from a window as Crusaders flood the streets. Years later, when he can finally write about it, he says, "They smashed the holy images and hurled the sacred relics of martyrs into places I am ashamed to mention." He describes Crusaders driving horses into the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom. They smash the silver iconostases, loading the pieces onto pack animals. A prostitute dances on the patriarch's throne while soldiers cheer. The altar where emperors were crowned desecrated. 700 years of uninterrupted worship violated. But buildings can be rebuilt. Relics can be recovered. What happened to the living could not be undone. Constantinople was filled with monasteries and convents. Thousands of monks and nuns who believed their vows, their purity, their devotion would shield them. They were wrong. The Crusaders swept through the city like a plague. Niktos writes, his hand shaking, that they spared neither age nor sex nor religious profession. Religious profession, medieval code for something unspeakable. It means nuns. Sister Euphemia lies on the chapel floor, blood spreading under her head. She's still conscious, barely. The other nuns huddle against the far wall. The youngest is 17. Sister Anna took her vows only 6 months ago. The oldest is 81. Sister Maria has been praying in this chapel since before some of these soldiers' grandfathers were born. The Crusaders don't see brides of Christ. They see spoils of war. A knight steps forward, later identified in Venetian records as Guillaume of Champlet, a nobleman from Burgundy. He's in full armor, a red cross over white linen on his chest. He's drunk enough that his words slur, but sober enough to know exactly what he's doing. These are heretics. He says in French, schismatics. The Pope himself has said they broke from the true church. It's a lie. Pope Innocent Roman III never said that. In fact, he'll later write that he's horrified by what happens here. But Guillaume either doesn't know or doesn't care. Sister Anna steps forward. In her hands is a small silver cross her grandmother brought from their village in Macedonia. She speaks in broken Latin. "We follow Christ, same as you. We pray to same God, please." Guillaume rips the cross from her hands, looks it over, then hurls it against the wall hard enough to dent the silver. "Your Christ lost," he says, "ours won." What happens next isn't guesswork. It's recorded in multiple sources, Catholic and Orthodox. Some describe it in cold, clinical words. Others can barely write it at all. The Devastatio Constantinopolitana, A contemporary account built from survivor testimonies puts it like this: the Latins violated the sanctity of holy places. They showed no reverence for virgins consecrated to God, nor for women of venerable age. They took them by force, and when the women resisted, the text stops. The scribe couldn't continue, but we know what happened because Sister Euphemia survives. A later Orthodox source, the Chronicle of Novgorod, records the stories of refugees who fled north to Russia. The Latins violated the nuns in the convents. They tore the icons from the walls and used them as tables for their feasts. They dressed dogs in priestly vestments and paraded them through the streets, and when the nuns tried to resist, again the chronicle breaks off. Again, the writer can't or won't put the rest into words, but other records fill in the silence, Catholic and Orthodox alike. One Catholic chronicler, Geoffroy de Villehardouin, who actually marched with the Crusaders, admitted, "Since the world was created, never had so much booty been taken from any city." Another Catholic, the papal legate Peter of Capua, was so horrified he wrote back to Rome that they spared neither age nor sex nor religious profession. Religious profession, again, code, it means nuns. Sister Anna is 17, Sister Maria is 81, it doesn't matter, the Crusaders take them, not all of them die quickly. Venetian records from 1205, just 1 year after the sack, list entries in the slave markets, Greek women of religious profession, nuns sold as slaves by Christians to Christians. Some of these women end up in harems and brothels in Venice. Others are shipped off to Crusader estates in the Levant, forced to serve in homes that mock their vows every single day. A few, very few, are eventually ransomed back by Orthodox communities that scrape together gold they don't have. Most simply disappear from history. Sister Euphemia is one of the few who escapes. She flees Constantinople with a small group of survivors, traveling through Greece and farther east into the lands of the Rus. She carries nothing but the clothes on her back, and memories she will spend the rest of her life trying not to relive. 37 years later, she is dying in a monastery in Thessaloniki. She's about 110 years old. Her hands shake as she talks. An Orthodox priest sits beside her, writing down every word. Her testimony is preserved in the Chronicle of Athos, hidden in a monastery library for centuries. She describes watching Sister Maria, the abbess, trying to shield the younger nuns. She describes Guillaume of Champlet laughing as he rips a relic from Maria's hands. She remembers what he said next: "Your Christ lost, ours won." She describes Sister Maria, 68 years old, scratching his face hard enough to draw blood. She describes him throwing the old woman down the convent steps, and the sound her skull made when it hit the stone. Sister Maria dies 3 days later. She never wakes up. Sister Euphemia remembers the other nuns, 42 women from 17 to 81, being dragged from the chapel. She remembers their screams. She remembers how some of the Crusaders still wore the cross, even as they committed acts that, in her words, would make demons weep. He wore the cross. Her testimony reads, "He wore the symbol of Christ's suffering, and he made us suffer in Christ's name." Years later, when Orthodox Christians finally retake Constantinople, they find something in the ruins of the convent of Christ Pantops. Scratched into the stone floor, almost invisible rough marks made with fingernails or broken pottery. 43 small crosses, 43 names written in Greek, and beneath them, in letters so faint you almost can't see them, "Father, forgive them. They knew not what they did," except they did know. Guillaume of Champlet knew exactly what he was doing when he threw a 68-year-old nun down those steps. The soldiers who dragged 17-year-old Sister Anna from the chapel knew exactly what they were doing. The Venetian merchants who sold Greek women of religious profession in the slave markets knew exactly what they were doing. They knew, and they did it anyway, because they had convinced themselves that these women, these Orthodox Christians, were heretics, schismatics, less than human, that Constantinople's wealth was rightfully theirs, that God himself had blessed this holy war, and anyone who stood in their way deserved whatever happened to them. They wore crosses. They prayed before battle, they took communion, and then they destroyed the very people they were supposed to protect. You've watched for about 8 minutes. If you're still here, it's because some part of you knows this story needs to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians, not for us, but for them, for the voices that were supposed to stay buried, for the women whose names were erased by the same people who claimed to fight for God. Now let's talk about what happened when the world found out. When news of the sack reaches Pope Innocent Roman III in Rome, he's reportedly physically sick. He writes to the Crusader leaders, "How is the Greek Church to be brought back to unity and devotion to the Apostolic See, when it sees in the Latins only an example of persecution and works of darkness, so that it now detests them more than dogs?" The Pope, who had launched this crusade, who had excommunicated these men twice, realizes what his holy war has done. It has destroyed any chance of bringing Christianity back together. Before 1204, there was still hope. Hope that the Great Schism of 1054 could be healed, that East and West could reconcile, that Orthodox and Catholic Christians might become one church again. After 1204, impossible. The Orthodox Church will forever remember the Fourth Crusade as the great betrayal, the moment Catholic Crusaders proved they were more interested in gold than God. The moment men wearing crosses carried out atrocities worse than anything any Muslim army had ever done to Christian civilians. Pope Innocent Roman III sends letter after letter condemning what happened. But it's too late. The gold is gone. The relics are scattered across Europe. The women are dead or enslaved or lost. And the Crusaders, most of them go home as heroes. Guillaume of Champlet, the knight who threw Sister Maria down those steps, later becomes Prince of Achaia. He rules over conquered Byzantine lands for years, dies peacefully in his own bed, and is buried with honors in a church he built using looted Byzantine gold. The empire he helped destroy never recovers. Constantinople limps along for another 2.5 centuries, a shadow of what it once was. Crusader lords bleed it dry, fighting each other over the spoils. And when the Ottomans finally take the city in 1453, many Orthodox Christians see it as God's judgment, not on them, but on the Latins who defiled it first. Better the turban of the Turk, they say, than the tiara of the Pope. Sister Euphemia lives until 1241. She is 110 years old when she dies in that monastery in Thessalonica. Before she passes, she gives one final instruction to the priest recording her testimony. Do not let them forget. Do not let them say it was just war. Do not let them say it was God's will. Priest nods, copies every word carefully, then hides the testimony in the monastery archives because the Catholic Church does not want this story spreading, and for centuries it works. Western history books describe the Fourth Crusade as a tragic mistake, an unfortunate detour. They talk about the looting of Constantinople, the destruction of priceless art and architecture. They debate whether the Crusaders were justified, whether the Byzantines brought it on themselves through political chaos or broken promises. They don't talk about the nuns. They never mention the 43 crosses scratched into the chapel floor. They don't name Sister Maria, thrown down the stairs at 68. They don't count Sister Anna, age 17, sold in a Venetian slave market. They don't acknowledge Sister Euphemia, who carried memories that bled for more than a century. The history is sanitized, cleaned up, softened for Western audiences who want to believe that the Crusades, however flawed, were still righteous. That Christian soldiers, however brutal, were fighting for a holy cause. But the Orthodox Church remembers differently. In monasteries across Greece, Russia, Serbia, every year on April 13th, they hold a memorial, not for the buildings destroyed or treasures stolen, but for the women erased. For centuries, Sister Euphemia's testimony sits buried in that monastery library, forgotten, collecting dust, until 1967, when a Greek historian named Anastasios Karpazillos researches Byzantine responses to the Fourth Crusade. At Mount Athos, he opens a brittle manuscript with faded ink. He starts reading and can't stop. the testimony of Sister Euphemia, age 110, describing in vivid, painful detail what happened inside the convent of Christ Pantops on April 13, 1204. Carpazillos publishes it in 1970. The academic world barely notices. It's in Greek. It's about nuns. It doesn't fit the narrative Western historians have pushed for 800 years. But the Orthodox Church notices. They've known all along. They've simply been waiting for the world to listen. So why does this story matter? Because it isn't actually about religion. It isn't even about the Crusades. It's about what happens when people convince themselves their cause is so righteous, so holy, so divinely ordained that anyone who stands in their way, even their own brothers and sisters, deserves whatever suffering comes next. The Crusaders who violated those nuns believed they were doing God's work. They believed Orthodox Christians were heretics who deserved punishment. They believed the wealth of Constantinople belonged to them as payment for their holy mission. They wore crosses, they prayed before battle, they took communion, and then they destroyed the very people they claimed to protect. Guillaume of Champlit wasn't a monster in the way we usually imagine monsters. He was a nobleman, educated, respected, probably considered himself devout. He genuinely believed what he did was justified, that Sister Maria, clutching her relic and begging for mercy, was standing between him and God's will. That is what makes this story terrifying. Not that evil men committed evil acts, but that ordinary men, convinced of their righteousness, committed atrocities and called them holy. History is written by the victors. But memory is written by the survivors, and the survivors, the Orthodox Church, the refugees, the hidden testimonies rediscovered centuries later. They remembered, for 800 years they remembered. In 2004, 8 centuries after the sack, Pope John Paul II visited Patriarch Bartholomew in Istanbul. The city that was once Constantinople, the city still scarred by 1204. And the Pope did something no Pope had ever done. He apologized for the Fourth Crusade, for the sack of Constantinople, for the grave sins Catholics committed against Orthodox Christians. It took 800 years, but someone finally said the words. The nuns of Constantinople never heard that apology. Sister Maria never heard anyone say her suffering mattered. Sister Anna, sold at 17 into a Venetian slave market, never learned that a pope would one day call what happened to her a grave sin. Their names are mostly lost. Their bodies were never given proper graves. Their suffering was erased from Western history. Yet their crosses remain, scratched into stone. 43 silent witnesses. The 13th century mystic Gregory Palamas, born just decades after the sack, wrote, "The Latins entered the house of God with harlots, defiled the altar, and made the church a dwelling for demons. They spared neither age nor beauty nor virtue. This was not the work of Christians. It was the work of men who forgot what the cross means. The cross was meant to symbolize sacrifice, laying down your life for others. Christ didn't wear the cross as a sign of conquest. He died on one as an act of love. But in 1204, the Crusaders turned it into a weapon. They stitched it on their chests and used it to justify rape, murder, and enslavement. They looked at women who had dedicated their lives to Christ and saw only property to claim. They forgot what the cross means. Sister Euphemia understood. When she was dying at 110, the priest asked if she forgave the men who destroyed her sisters. She said something that still echoes across 8 centuries. "I forgive them because Christ commands it, but I will not let them be forgotten, because forgetting is how it happens again." You've just heard one of history's darkest truths, a story buried, sanitized, erased because it was too ugly, too inconvenient, too damaging to the myth of holy war. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily we justify cruelty when it's wrapped in the right symbols, then subscribe to Bloodstone Histories and help keep the past alive. Some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced 800 years ago. Especially then, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.